The scorching Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the small frontier town of Redemption Creek as Elizabeth Foster stood trembling on the makeshift wooden platform, her wrists bound with coarse rope that bit into her delicate skin. At 22, she had never imagined her own flesh and blood, her stepbrother Silas and his wife Meredith, would strip her of her dignity in such a cruel manner after her father's death. $500 for the girl! Silas bellowed to the crowd of rough-looking men who had gathered in the dusty street, their hungry eyes appraising her like livestock. Strong back, can cook and clean, and ain't bad to look at neither. His words cut through Elizabeth like a knife as she fought back tears, determined not to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. The crowd of miners, cowboys, and drifters laughed and jeered, calling out crude offers that made her stomach turn as she scanned the horizon, praying for a miracle that seemed unlikely to come in this unforgiving territory. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to the channel. Where are you watching from today? From the edge of the gathered crowd, a tall figure watched the proceedings with dark, penetrating eyes that missed nothing. Nathaniel Black Wolf Sullivan stood motionless, his weathered face betraying no emotion as he observed the woman being sold like property. At 45, he had lived many lives, cavalry scout, bounty hunter, and now respected leader of a mixed band of Apache and settlers who had formed an uneasy alliance in the contested borderlands. The half-Apache, half-Irish man had earned his name through countless battles and a fierce reputation that spread fear throughout the territory. Yet something in the proud way the woman held herself despite her circumstances stirred something long dormant within him. Nathaniel's hand rested casually on his Colt revolver as his gaze shifted to the sneering man conducting this disgraceful auction. Noting the family resemblance between him and the woman, this was no ordinary slave sale, but something far more sinister. The crowd parted unconsciously as he moved forward, men stepping aside instinctively in the presence of the legendary warrior whose scalping knife was rumored to have claimed over 30 men who had crossed him or threatened those under his protection. $1,000! Nathaniel's voice cut through the crowd like a whip crack, silencing the raucous bidding as all eyes turned to the imposing figure standing before the platform. The offer was more than double the highest bid, and Silas Foster's eyes widened with greedy delight as he nodded eagerly, not recognizing the dangerous man who had just spoken. "Sold to the gentleman," he declared, extending his hand for payment, while Elizabeth looked up for the first time, her eyes meeting Nathaniel's with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Without breaking eye contact with her, Nathaniel tossed a leather pouch heavy with gold dust onto the platform, the contents worth considerably more than his bid. "I'm taking her now," he stated in a tone that brooked no argument, his hand still resting meaningfully on his revolver as murmurs rippled through the crowd, some of recognition, others of warning to those who didn't know who stood before them. The journey from Redemption Creek to Nathaniel's territory was conducted in tense silence, with Elizabeth riding behind him on his powerful stallion, her body rigid with uncertainty about what fate awaited her with this mysterious, intimidating man. The harsh landscape gradually changed as they traveled higher into the mountains, juniper and pine trees appearing among the cacti and scrub brush as the air grew cooler with elevation. By nightfall, they had reached a hidden valley that seemed to exist in defiance of the surrounding desert, a place where a small creek fed lush vegetation and several well-built cabins stood alongside traditional Apache wickiups in an unusual coexistence of cultures. Women, children, and men of both native and European descent moved about the settlement, many pausing to watch curiously as Nathaniel returned with the strange white woman. "This is Thunder Valley," he finally spoke, his deep voice oddly gentle as he helped Elizabeth dismount. "No one will harm you here or treat you as property." Elizabeth stood shakily on solid ground, her legs cramped from the long ride and her mind reeling from the day's events as she tried to process her surroundings and the man who had purchased her freedom, or perhaps merely changed her captivity. "Why did you buy me?" she asked directly, finding her voice at last as she faced him squarely despite her fear, her blue eyes flashing with a spirit that had not been broken by her ordeal. Nathaniel studied her for a long moment before answering, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "I don't hold with selling human beings," he replied simply, though there seemed to be more behind his words than he was willing to share. "You're free to stay or go as you please, though I wouldn't recommend trying to make it back through Apache territory alone." He gestured toward a cabin at the edge of the settlement. "You can sleep there tonight. Tomorrow we'll talk about what you want to do." The cabin was simple but clean, with a small fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bed covered with intricately woven blankets that combined Apache designs with European patterns, much like everything else in this unusual settlement. After washing away the dust of travel and changing into a simple dress, provided by a kind-faced native woman who introduced herself as Morning Dove, Elizabeth sat by the fireplace, contemplating her situation. Her father's sudden death had left her at the mercy of her stepbrother, who had quickly claimed the ranch and everything else of value before declaring that Elizabeth herself was part of the property to be disposed of. The humiliation of being auctioned off burned in her memory. Alongside the strange rescue by this man they called Black Wolf, a name she had heard whispered with fear in town, but who had shown her nothing but gruff courtesy since claiming her. Morning broke with the calls of unfamiliar birds and the distant sound of children's laughter, pulling Elizabeth from a surprisingly deep sleep despite her troubled thoughts. Venturing outside, she found the settlement already bustling with activity. Women grinding corn and preparing breakfast, men checking weapons and horses, children running errands or playing in the creek. She felt eyes upon her, some curious, others suspicious, as she made her way toward the central fire, where Morning Dove beckoned her with a gentle smile. "Black Wolf asks that you join him for breakfast when you are ready," the woman explained, handing Elizabeth a steaming cup of coffee. "He is in the large wickiup with the eagle feathers." The structure she indicated stood slightly apart from the others, its entrance decorated with symbols Elizabeth couldn't decipher, but which clearly marked it as belonging to someone of importance within the community. Nathaniel was seated on a woven mat inside the spacious dwelling, various weapons and maps spread before him as he conferred quietly with 2 men, one Apache and one white, who departed with respectful nods as Elizabeth hesitantly entered. "Miss Foster," he acknowledged, gesturing for her to sit across from him while Morning Dove brought in plates of food, venison, flatbread and wild berries, before discreetly withdrawing. "I imagine you have questions." His direct approach was refreshing after the deceit she had endured from her stepfamily, though his intense gaze still made her uncomfortable. "Several," Elizabeth admitted, meeting his eyes with newfound determination. "Beginning with how you knew my name when I never gave it." A slight smile, the first she had seen, briefly softened his harsh features. "Your father, James Foster, was known to me. A good man who treated fairly with the Apache and kept his word, unlike most whites in these parts." The revelation that he had known her father left Elizabeth momentarily speechless, a flood of grief washing over her as she processed this unexpected connection. "Did you know what Silas planned after father died?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathaniel's expression darkened as he set down his coffee cup. "No. By the time word reached me that James had passed and his stepson had taken over, I was dealing with army patrols encroaching on our hunting grounds." He paused, studying her reaction carefully. "Had I known, I would have intervened sooner." Something in his tone suggested a deeper connection than mere acquaintance with her father. But before Elizabeth could question him further, commotion outside drew his attention. Rising in one fluid motion that belied his size, Nathaniel moved to the entrance, his hand automatically reaching for the knife at his belt as voices called out in Apache. "Stay here," he ordered, his entire demeanor shifting to that of a warrior as he strode out to address whatever crisis had arisen. Left alone, Elizabeth's curiosity overcame her caution as she moved around the dwelling, noting the strange blend of cultures that seemed to define Nathaniel Sullivan's existence. Apache weapons and ceremonial items hung alongside books in English, some well-worn volumes of Shakespeare, military tactics, and surprisingly, poetry. A small wooden chest caught her eye, partially opened to reveal what appeared to be letters and a faded photograph. Without fully considering the consequences, she carefully lifted the image and felt her heart stop as she recognized her father, much younger, standing beside a handsome Apache woman and a small boy with features that unmistakably combined both parents. The dates and names scratched on the back confirmed what her mind struggled to accept. Nathaniel Sullivan was her half-brother, born to her father and an Apache woman named White Feather long before James Foster had married Elizabeth's mother. "That was taken the last time I saw him as a boy," Nathaniel's voice came from directly behind her, causing Elizabeth to whirl around, the photograph still clutched in her trembling hand. She had not heard him return, a testament to his Apache upbringing. Instead of anger at her invasion of his privacy, his expression held a complex mixture of resignation and something that might have been relief. "He visited when he could, brought books and taught me English, until the army campaigns made it too dangerous for a white man to be seen with Apaches." He gently took the photograph from her unresisting fingers and studied it for a moment. "When I was 15, my mother was killed in a cavalry attack. I went to him then, filled with hate and seeking revenge against all whites. Instead of turning me away, he convinced me that walking the line between two worlds might someday help bring peace." "Why didn't he ever tell me about you?" Elizabeth whispered, her world shifting beneath her as pieces of her father's mysterious absences and his unexpected knowledge of Apache language and customs suddenly made painful sense. Nathaniel's laugh held no humor as he carefully returned the photograph to its place. A respected rancher with an Apache son in this territory, he was protecting both of us by keeping that secret. He turned to face her fully, his resemblance to their father now unmistakable to her newly opened eyes. "When I heard he had married again and had a daughter, I stayed away, but I kept watch from a distance, and he would send messages through trusted friends." His jaw tightened visibly. "The last message I received from him warned that he was ill and concerned about his second wife's son. He asked me to look out for you if anything happened to him." The revelation left Elizabeth reeling as she sank onto a nearby seat, her mind racing to reconcile this new reality with everything she had believed about her life and family. "So yesterday at the auction, you were fulfilling a promise to father?" The thought carried both comfort and a strange disappointment she couldn't immediately identify. Nathaniel studied her for a long moment before answering. "Partly," he acknowledged, his voice lower, "but there was something more." He hesitated, seeming to choose his words carefully. "The Apache believe that when certain souls meet, they recognize each other from before. When I saw you standing there with such dignity despite your circumstances, I felt—" He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable with expressing such sentiments. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that you're safe now, and you have choices before you that you didn't have yesterday." Before Elizabeth could respond, a young Apache warrior burst into the wickiup, speaking rapidly in his native tongue. Nathaniel's expression hardened instantly as he replied in the same language before turning back to Elizabeth. Riders approaching. A large party from Redemption Creek. His hand moved automatically to check his revolver. It seems your stepbrother has discovered who purchased you and has brought men to rescue you from the savage. The last word dripped with irony as he quickly gathered weapons. Stay here with Morning Dove. This will be settled one way or another today. As he moved toward the entrance, Elizabeth found herself reaching out to grasp his arm, the contact seeming to surprise them both. Wait, she said urgently. Silas doesn't want to rescue me. He wants to eliminate any threat to his inheritance. If he knows you're my half-brother, the thundering of hooves and shouting voices announced the arrival of Silas Foster and his men before Nathaniel could respond to Elizabeth's warning. Through the open entrance, she could see approximately 15 riders circling the settlement, their weapons drawn as women hurriedly gathered children and men took defensive positions. Nathaniel strode out to meet the intruders, his tall figure commanding attention as he raised one hand in a gesture that was simultaneously greeting and warning. That's far enough, Foster, his voice carried clearly across the distance. State your business, and then leave my territory. Silas Foster. A stocky man, with their father's auburn hair but none of his integrity, sneered down from his horse. I've come for my sister, half-breed, and to teach you a lesson about stealing what belongs to me. His gaze swept contemptuously over the settlement. Got quite a nice setup here. Might be worth claiming for decent folk once we've cleared out the vermin. Elizabeth felt a surge of protective fury, unlike anything she had experienced before as she stepped out of the wickiup. Ignoring Nathaniel's earlier instruction to stay hidden. I belong to no one, Silas, she called out, moving to stand beside her newly discovered half-brother. Especially not to a man who would sell his own sister to cover gambling debts. Murmurs rippled through Silas's men at this revelation, some shifting uncomfortably in their saddles. Silas's face darkened with rage as he pointed accusingly. She's been bewitched by this savage, probably forced into his bed already. His voice rose hysterically as he tried to maintain control of his men, many of whom were clearly having second thoughts about this confrontation, now that they realized the savage was the legendary Black Wolf. $500 to any man who shoots him down and brings me the girl. The tension in the air was palpable as Nathaniel's people and Silas's riders faced each other across the clearing, trigger fingers twitching and neither side willing to be the first to back down. Elizabeth's heart pounded in her ears as she realized that blood, perhaps much of it innocent, would be shed because of her. Without fully forming a plan, she stepped forward into the open space between the opposing forces. There's something all of you should know before anyone starts shooting, she called out, her voice stronger than she felt. Nathaniel Sullivan is my half-brother, the legitimate son of James Foster. Gasps and murmurs greeted this announcement as she continued, gaining confidence. My father's will, which Silas claimed was lost, named both of us as his heirs. Silas knew this, which is why he tried to sell me to the highest bidder, and now wants me silenced. Nathaniel had moved protectively closer to Elizabeth during her declaration, his eyes never leaving Silas and the most threatening of his men. Is this true, Sullivan? Demanded one of the riders, an older man Elizabeth recognized as Judge Harmon from Redemption Creek. Nathaniel gave a single curt nod. James Foster was my father. I have letters in his hand confirming it, and witnesses who knew of his relationship with my mother. His gaze locked with Silas's increasingly desperate one. I didn't come forward before because I respected my father's wish to keep it private during his lifetime, but I won't stand by while this man destroys what James Foster built or harms his daughter. The judge's weathered face showed conflicted emotions as he processed this information, clearly weighing the legal implications against the territory's deep-seated prejudices. Silas, sensing the situation slipping from his control, made a fatal mistake, born of desperation and hatred. With a strangled cry of rage, he drew his pistol and fired at Nathaniel, but his hand was unsteady, and the bullet tore through Elizabeth's sleeve instead, grazing her arm. What happened next occurred with such lightning speed that onlookers would later disagree about the exact sequence of events. Nathaniel's revolver cleared its holster in a blur, firing once with deadly accuracy. Simultaneously, several of his Apache warriors released arrows that found marks among Silas's most aggressive supporters. When the brief, terrible moment of violence ended, Silas Foster lay dead in the dust, along with 3 of his men. The remaining riders had pulled back, weapons lowered, as Judge Harmon raised his hands in a gesture of surrender and negotiation. The aftermath of the confrontation brought profound changes to Elizabeth's life and to the uneasy relations between settlers and Apaches in the territory. Judge Harmon, after reviewing James Foster's letters and other evidence Nathaniel provided, reluctantly acknowledged his legal claim to a share of the Foster ranch. More surprisingly to many, he also upheld Elizabeth's right to her inheritance despite being a woman, citing special circumstances and perhaps influenced by the formidable presence of Black Wolf and his warriors during the proceedings. The Foster Ranch, once a symbol of Elizabeth's painful past, was sold by mutual agreement between the half-siblings, the proceeds divided equally to allow each to build something new. For Nathaniel, it meant expanding Thunder Valley's boundaries and establishing legal recognition for his people's territory, a rare victory in a time when native lands were constantly under threat. For Elizabeth, the months following her dramatic rescue became a time of profound personal transformation as she found herself drawn deeper into life at Thunder Valley. Initially planning to use her inheritance to travel east to Boston or Philadelphia, where a woman of means might establish herself respectably, she repeatedly delayed her departure, finding unexpected purpose in bridging the cultural divide between the Apache and settler communities. Her facility with languages allowed her to quickly learn Apache, while her education proved valuable in teaching the settlement's children and in helping Nathaniel navigate the increasingly complex legal challenges to their existence. Most surprising to Elizabeth was the growing change in her relationship with the man who had begun as her rescuer, revealed himself as her brother, and was now evolving into something far more complicated, a development that both excited and troubled her, given their shared parentage. "It's not by blood," Mourning Dove explained gently one evening as she observed Elizabeth's obvious inner conflict while watching Nathaniel train young warriors in knife-fighting techniques. The older woman's knowing eyes held no judgment, only wisdom accumulated through decades of observing human hearts. "James Foster may have sired you both, but you come from different mothers, different worlds. The Creator brought you together for a purpose." Elizabeth blushed deeply at having her thoughts so easily read, but couldn't deny the growing attraction she felt toward Nathaniel, his quiet strength, unwavering integrity, and the rare moments of tenderness he revealed only to her. Among the Apache, such a union would be considered powerful, Mourning Dove continued, her weathered hands continuing to weave the intricate basket they were working on together, 2 streams joining to form a stronger river. Elizabeth's fingers trembled slightly as she considered implications that would scandalize white society, but which, in this place between worlds, seemed to follow a different and perhaps more natural law. The question of their relationship remained unspoken between them through the changing seasons as Thunder Valley prospered under their joint leadership. Elizabeth's knowledge of white legal systems and business practices complemented Nathaniel's strategic mind and understanding of the land, creating an unprecedented stability for their growing community. Together, they established trading relationships with fair-minded settlers, negotiated hunting rights with neighboring tribes, and even secured a tentative peace with certain army officers who respected Nathaniel's reputation enough to avoid unnecessary conflict. Throughout these shared triumphs and challenges, Elizabeth became increasingly aware of the unspoken tension between them, the lingering glances, the careful maintenance of physical distance, the way conversations sometimes faltered into charged silence when they found themselves alone together. Winter came early that year, bringing bitter cold and heavy snow that isolated Thunder Valley from the outside world for weeks at a time. On the longest night of the year, as the settlement celebrated an Apache ceremony welcoming the gradual return of the sun, Elizabeth stood slightly apart from the festivities. Wrapped in a thick blanket as she gazed at stars that seemed close enough to touch in the crystal-clear mountain air. She sensed, rather than heard Nathaniel's approach, his ability to move silently still, surprising her after all this time. "You should be inside by the fire," he said quietly, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air as he came to stand beside her. "The elders are telling stories of the before time that I think you would find interesting." Elizabeth smiled without turning, acutely aware of his proximity. "I needed a moment to think," she admitted, "about what happens when the snow melts." Nathaniel was silent for so long that she finally turned to look at him, finding his expression unusually vulnerable in the starlight. "You're still planning to leave," he stated rather than asked, his deep voice carefully neutral, though his eyes betrayed deeper emotions. Elizabeth gathered her courage, knowing this moment had been inevitable since the day he had rescued her. "That depends," she said softly, "on whether there's a reason compelling enough for me to stay." The implication of her words hung between them, like the vapor of their breath in the cold air, impossible to ignore or retract. Nathaniel's hand moved slightly toward hers before he controlled the impulse, his conflicted feelings evident in the tension of his posture. "Elizabeth," he began hesitantly, "what lies between us? Many would call it wrong. The world outside this valley would never accept—" "I'm not asking the world," Elizabeth interrupted with newfound boldness, moving closer until barely a handspan separated them. "I'm asking you, Nathaniel Sullivan. We share a father, but not blood ties that matter to the Apache ways, as I've come to understand them. We've built something here that matters, something that could grow stronger." Her heart pounded as she laid her true feelings bare at last. "If you tell me you feel nothing beyond brotherhood for me, I'll accept that and find my place elsewhere when spring comes. But if there's something more—" She let the question hang unfinished, both terrified and exhilarated by her own daring as she searched his face for a response. For a breathless moment, he remained utterly still, then with deliberate slowness, as if giving her every chance to withdraw, he raised his hand to gently touch her cheek. "Since the moment I saw you standing on that auction platform, something in me recognized you, not as kin, but as the other half of myself," Nathaniel confessed, his voice deeper than usual with suppressed emotion. "I fought against it, told myself it was wrong, that I was only honoring my promise to James." His thumb traced the curve of her cheekbone with infinite tenderness. "But each day you stayed, each time you stood beside me facing whatever came against us, that feeling only grew stronger." Elizabeth leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his as he continued, "The Apache believe that some souls are destined to find each other across any distance or obstacle. I never understood that teaching until now." With exquisite gentleness, he lowered his mouth to hers in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened with months of restrained passion. His strong arms finally encircling her as she pressed herself against him, the cold night forgotten in the heat that flared between them. Spring brought new growth to Thunder Valley and formalized the union between Elizabeth Foster and Nathaniel Sullivan in a ceremony that honored both Apache traditions and enough Christian elements to satisfy Elizabeth's sense of propriety. Judge Harmon, who had become an unexpected ally, traveled from Redemption Creek to officiate at the legal aspects, bringing news that the territory governor had officially recognized their land claims, a significant victory in an era when native rights were routinely ignored. The celebration lasted 3 days, bringing together not only their immediate community but also representatives from neighboring Apache bands and those progressive-minded settlers brave enough to accept the invitation. As dusk fell on the final evening, Elizabeth stood beside her husband on the ridge overlooking their valley, his arm wrapped securely around her waist as they watched the blending of firelight and starlight below. From property to be auctioned to the wife of the territory's most feared Apache leader, Elizabeth mused, leaning her head against Nathaniel's shoulder. My father would hardly believe how his children's paths have converged. Nathaniel's laugh rumbled deep in his chest as he pressed a kiss to her temple. James Foster was a man who saw beyond the limitations of his time, he reminded her. I think he would be proud of what we've built here, a place where neither world has to surrender to the other, but where something new can grow from both. Elizabeth turned in his arms to face him, her expression serious despite her happiness. It won't always be this peaceful, she acknowledged, thinking of the increasing pressure from mining companies and railroad interests pushing ever further into Apache territory. There will be those who want to destroy what we've created. Nathaniel's expression reflected her concerns, but held firm resolve rather than fear as he gazed down at the woman who had transformed from victim to equal partner in creating their shared vision. Then they'll learn what generations of enemies have discovered about the Apache, he stated with quiet certainty, his arms tightening protectively around her. We endure, we adapt, but we never surrender what matters most. His kiss silenced further worries as the evening star appeared above the mountains. Witness to an unlikely love that had bridged worlds considered irreconcilable by most. In the valley below, Apache songs mingled with a settler's fiddle in harmony that seemed to echo their own union, different yet complementary, challenging yet natural, forbidden yet somehow destined, since long before Elizabeth had stood trembling on an auction platform and caught the dark, measuring gaze of a legendary warrior who would become first her rescuer, then her brother, and finally, against all odds, the love and partner she had never dared imagine finding in the harsh beauty of the American frontier. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.